Welcome back. Budget cuts in NYC are having a major impact on workforce development, particularly in reentry programs for people who were previously incarcerated. The Rikers reentry services face a $17 million cut, negatively affecting the economic stability of formerly incarcerated New Yorkers. CEO of NYC's Employment and Training Coalition, Greg Morris, joins me to discuss what these cuts will mean to vulnerable New Yorkers in need of these services. Greg, thank you so much for joining me.
It's a pleasure to be here. Really appreciate it.
Now, can you tell us about the New York City Employment and Training Coalition?
Sure. New York City Employment and Training Coalition is the largest city-based workforce development association in the country. More than 220 member organizations focused on supporting the needs of job seekers in New York City. So that's everything from job readiness and training to career advancement and retention, located in every borough, thinking about every major industry, and every age range, because in this city we have to think about young adults all the way to second act careers in terms of access to opportunity and employment access.
Now, what areas have been affected so far by the massive cuts to the workforce development?
Yeah, I think we need to put it in context in that our mayor at the State of the City address talked about a working people's agenda. And I was part of a convening of workforce development leaders and funders and labor and other providers as part of what's called the Future of Work Task Force. And it was all sort of centered around this idea of how do we get New York City post-pandemic focused on thinking about how it is that there's equal access to opportunity, that this is truly an inclusive city, and that there's equity. And the reality is, systemically, historically, there's significant disproportion in terms of what it is that job seekers have opportunities to do and what wages look like too. So all that to say, when we put forth an agenda that's about making sure that folks can work towards quality jobs, anytime that the city talks about cuts, whether it's related to folks who are justice impacted, whether it's related to young adult services, when we talk about cuts to libraries, where there is workforce development and job training opportunities, that has a direct impact. When folks talk about cuts or potential cuts to discretionary services, those impact job training development services. So I say all this to say this is an opportunity to double down on workforce development, which is really a matter of talking about talent development. And what that means is we need to get talent, New York talent, ready for great New York jobs. And those jobs come in all sizes, but they all have to have a wage that can allow you to live in the city.
Now, I really want to talk about the Rikers reentry services. Can you just tell us what that is? I mentioned that there was a $17 million cut, which sounds like a lot of money. But first, before we can delve into that, can you just talk about what those services are?
Sure. So there is a group of providers, many of whom are connected to this Workforce Development Association that I operate, the New York City Employment Training Coalition, who have been focused on meeting the needs of those folks who are thinking about reentry. So whether that's related to mental health services, legal services, housing services, it's all about getting ready for what's next. And from where I sit, the investment that they make in thinking about job training and workforce development is huge, because the statistics related to folks who are justice impacted, leaving incarceration, and the challenges they're experiencing finding employment are tremendous. I mean, the latest statistics that I've seen, 33+% of those who were incarcerated have difficulty finding employment access. 60% at any given time are probably jobless. The reality of it is that if folks are not ready for what's coming next, and they're not prepared and not getting the resources, training, guidance that they need, they're not able to find a foothold in the workforce. That's a disproportionate impact. That's something that we can't find acceptable, because again, regardless of your starting point, or regardless of what needing their second, third, or fourth opportunity, folks need access to good jobs. And those jobs count, because those are the things that help you take care of your family and ensure your stability.
Now, can you talk a little bit more about the challenges that formerly incarcerated people face when they are looking for work? Because I think a lot of people, when I hear people who were in prison, like going back into the world, it's more like mental health, and all those things are very important. But of course, you need employment to kind of
That's right.
live.
That's
So
right.
can you talk about those challenges?
Yeah, just if you look at the statistics on this, on average, it's less employment access, lower wages. That's what comes across whenever you think about, or anytime any data has been collected specific to folks who have been justice impacted seeking employment opportunity. So that means you don't just have one knock, you've got multiple knocks sort of against you. And this investment that these providers were making to connect and build relationships with these folks to prepare them for what's coming next was huge and tremendous. And the city's communication that they were going to cut back on this, which came without a lot of notice, to pass on the sort of training opportunities that were being provided to the Department of Corrections, folks who are not experts in this type of job training, guidance, evidence-based practice, is really devastating to, it's as many as 1,700 individuals who are receiving these supportive reentry services. And also, and it's worth noting, I think it's an important point, as many as 90 individuals, many of whom were formerly incarcerated, largely Black and brown folks who were doing this training. So in other words, they were the ones that were hired to do this work and do this training. So now they may face job loss as well. So again, from every angle, this is not a representation of what I think a working people's agenda would really be like. This is not, and this is not what it should look like to ensure access. I guess the other thing I'll say is, and you said this, 17 million seems like a lot, but just remember, the city budget is over $100 billion. So when you think about it from that perspective, sometimes it's good to take a step back and say, wait a minute, is this a cut that's necessary? Is this a cut that means something? Does this reflect our values?
Now, how will this prevent formerly incarcerated New Yorkers from economic stability? And I love that you also mentioned that it's affecting like a lot of Black and brown people who were
Sure.
providing these services. So I guess you could talk about it just overall, how it's preventing so many vulnerable New Yorkers from obtaining economic stability.
Yeah, let's start from just the reality in this particular moment in our city's history. What the white unemployment rate is about 1.3%. The Black unemployment rate is 12.2%. That's the largest it's been since the Great Recession. So we're going back almost 20 years. The reality of this particular moment in time is that we're looking at a disparity, and we're looking at an investment from this administration in thinking about how to address that disparity. And any time that you see an immediate, urgent need for access, while you're thinking about what's coming next for this city, the economic opportunity, the different industry and career opportunities that are sort of unfolding in the city, it requires us to do something hard, which is do two things at once: meet immediate needs and create the scaffold for the future. And that's particularly important right now. And it's important right now for a variety of reasons. We talked about the unemployment rate, but I'll just also note for you, sometimes in this city, we talk about how the city has bounced back or is bouncing back. And you even hear that related to jobs. So they say, well, we're about at 99% of the jobs that we had before the pandemic. But the question is, where are those jobs? Many face-to-face entry-level jobs are no longer available. So disproportionately, who's being harmed by that? Who needs to be prepared for a next step opportunity? At exactly the same time, some of the opportunities that have grown in the city related to healthcare, related to social services, those jobs are available and those have grown, but they have the lowest wages. Again, disproportionately impacting Black and brown New Yorkers. We need to change that.
Now, can you talk about the social implications of defunding the reentry program?
I think we're in a moment in our sort of collective history where we have to ask ourselves the question: what sacrifices and what commitments do we make to ensure equity? And I think that's particularly important for us. We can play this from the angle of, what does it cost to keep someone incarcerated? Well, that's about $500,000 per year, right? We could do that. We could play that game. Financially, it doesn't make sense. We want folks to have better outcomes. We can play it from the perspective of, does it make sense that a family on the outside of this, what is it a family needs to ensure their success? Well, to ensure that someone doesn't experience recidivism, the typical issue is related to poverty, right? What's poverty related to? The job access, it's about wages, right? And it's about opportunity that's associated with that over time. So again, I think when you think about it from that perspective, this cut has ramifications. This cut is harming the workforce. This cut is something that is not reflective, I think, of what our values are as a city that is seeking opportunity for all. Remember, this is a place where everyone should be able to find success.
Now, can you tell us more about your report, Pathways to an Inclusive Economy?
Yeah, this is the city's commitment. I was part of the task force that was convened to think about how it is that we can create a truly inclusive economy. And that was a dynamic and interesting engagement of workforce providers, funders, employers, city government, labor, all around the table to sort of sort out how this city has to change. And there were about 5 different really pointed recommendations associated with that particular report that we really need to zone in on. One, the mayor has championed for a great deal of time, which is related to expanding apprenticeships. Apprenticeships are a great opportunity that can lead to access to careers and career development over time. Metrics, funding, all part of this. Employer front door, all part of this picture as well. But again, the idea is about ensuring, and this came from the mayor's executive order 22, it's all about ensuring that if you're a young adult, you've got a true career pathway. If you're someone with vulnerabilities, you have the opportunity to be successful. If you're someone who needs a second act career and you need to reskill or upskill, we're going to make sure that happens. And we're going to ensure diversity and equity over time. I'm proud to be part of that commitment, but that requires an investment. And this city needs to invest over time so that we meet immediate needs, because the city is increasingly unaffordable at the same time as we set our course for the future jobs in this city. And there are lots, and there's lots of opportunities here. It's our training providers, it's the New York City Employment Training Coalition that's really relied on by the city to ensure those job opportunities and that training is available. We want to make sure employers are ready for us so that New York talent can thrive.
Now, we have about a minute left. And this may be a loaded question, but what could be done when we hear stories like this and we want to make a difference and we don't want to see these cuts happen? What could be done to ensure that people get the services they need?
Great question. I'm part of an advocacy organization that focuses on budget, legislation, and compliance issues. What does that mean? We need to make sure the money is available to execute on our priorities. We need to make sure that the laws are in place that expand access. And we need to make sure that any contract that the city has is fulfilled, whether that's supporting human services workers with the cost of living adjustment, or whether it's standing together in front of City Hall or other places to say, we need to invest in the workforce now, and we need to continue that commitment over time. That's the work that it takes. So you have to make sure you know your council members, you know your representatives, and we as a city are relentless about holding folks accountable for the success of everyone, because that's a new New York.
Well, Greg, thank you so much for joining us and having this conversation.
My pleasure. Thank you.
For more information about the New York City Employment and Training Coalition, please go to their website at www.nycetc.org or follow them on social media at nycetc_org. We have to take a quick break, but we'll be back with more Open right after this.